In 1949, a small island off the coast of China received 2 million desperate refugees. They arrived with almost nothing: a defeated government, a broken army, and suitcases full of gold. The island was poor, mostly farmers, rice paddies, fishing villages. Per capita income was barely above some of the poorest places on Earth. Today, that same island produces the most advanced computer chips on the planet, the kind that power iPhones, AI systems, fighter jets, and supercomputers. That island is Taiwan. And somehow, a place that once survived on sugar and rice became the beating heart of the global technology economy. The obvious explanation is hard work, education, and innovation. But that's only part of the story, because Taiwan's rise wasn't just about talent. It was about a very strange economic gamble, and the world is now completely dependent on it. To understand why Taiwan is rich today, you have to start with a political disaster. In 1949, the Chinese Civil War ended with Mao Zedong winning the mainland. The losing side, the nationalist government, fled to Taiwan. They didn't arrive empty-handed. They brought roughly 2 million soldiers, bureaucrats, and intellectuals. They also brought China's central bank reserves, gold, foreign currency, art, and archives. And most importantly, they brought urgency, because everyone on that island knew one uncomfortable truth: China might come back. Taiwan wasn't just rebuilding an economy, it was racing against time. At the beginning, Taiwan looked like a typical poor country. Agriculture dominated the economy. Industrial capacity was almost non-existent. Infrastructure was weak. But the government made one early decision that would quietly shape everything: land reform. Large landowners were forced to sell land to farmers at controlled prices. The state redistributed farmland across the island. Millions of farmers suddenly owned the land they worked on. This did two things at once. First, it massively boosted agricultural productivity. Farmers worked harder when the land was theirs. Second, it created something more subtle. Rural households began earning surplus income, and when farmers earn extra money, they don't usually buy stocks. They buy machines. Small workshops appeared everywhere. Sewing machines, metal tools, tiny factories attached to family homes. Taiwan wasn't industrializing through giant corporations. It was industrializing through thousands of small businesses. By the 1960s, the government made its next big move: export or die. Instead of protecting domestic industries behind tariffs, Taiwan pushed companies to sell products abroad: cheap toys, plastic goods, shoes, textiles, simple things. Factories multiplied, workers moved from farms to cities, foreign currency started flowing in. But here's the interesting part. Taiwan didn't try to build national champions immediately. Instead, it focused on something less glamorous: manufacturing discipline. Factories learned how to produce consistent quality, on time, at scale. It sounds boring, but this skill would later become incredibly valuable, because by the late 1970s, the global economy was changing. Electronics were starting to explode: computers, semiconductors, digital technology. Most countries wanted to design the future. Taiwan chose something different. It decided to manufacture it. At the time, making computer chips was considered an extremely risky business. The costs were enormous. The technology changed constantly. One mistake could wipe out billions. Most Western companies believed chip design and chip manufacturing should happen inside the same company. Taiwan questioned that assumption in the early 1980s. The Taiwanese government funded a research institute to study semiconductor technology. They hired engineers trained in the United States, many of them Taiwanese students who had studied abroad. One of them was a man named Morris Chang. Chang had spent decades working in the American semiconductor industry. He understood something most people didn't. Chip design and chip manufacturing were two completely different businesses. Design required creativity and software tools. Manufacturing required extreme precision, massive factories, and obsessive process control. Combining both inside one company was incredibly expensive. So Chang proposed a strange idea. What if Taiwan built factories that produced chips for other companies? No designs, no products, just pure manufacturing. At the time, this idea sounded ridiculous. Why would companies trust a third party to manufacture their most valuable technology? But Taiwan had two advantages. First, it had spent decades perfecting high-quality manufacturing. Second, it had government support willing to take a long-term risk. In 1987, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company was born. TSMC, its entire business model was simple. Other companies designed chips. TSMC manufactures them. At first, customers were small firms that couldn't afford their own factories. Then something unexpected happened. The model started working. Chip design companies realized they no longer needed to spend billions building factories. They could focus purely on innovation, and the manufacturing would happen in Taiwan. Over time, this separation reshaped the entire semiconductor industry. Companies like NVIDIA, AMD, Qualcomm, and Apple began designing increasingly complex chips. But the physical production often ended up in one place: TSMC's factories. Building advanced semiconductor fabs is brutally difficult. The machines cost hundreds of millions each. The rooms must be cleaner than operating theaters. A single grain of dust can ruin thousands of chips, but Taiwan had something rare: an entire ecosystem built around precision manufacturing. Engineers, suppliers, tooling companies, skilled technicians. Each year the factories became more advanced: 5 nanometers, 3 nanometers. Soon, too, numbers so small they're almost meaningless outside physics labs. Yet these tiny improvements determined the power of modern computing, and gradually something strange happened. The world's most powerful technology companies became dependent on a small island. By the 2020s, Taiwan was producing around 60% of the world's semiconductors. But in the most advanced chips, the dominance was even more extreme, over 90%, which leads to a very uncomfortable question. What happens if those factories stop? Because Taiwan sits only about 130 kilometers from mainland China, and China views the island as part of its territory. Geopolitically, this makes Taiwan one of the most sensitive places on Earth. The chips produced their power global supply chains: cars, smartphones, data centers, weapons systems. During the pandemic, when semiconductor supply briefly tightened, car factories around the world shut down. Now imagine something worse: a blockade, a conflict, even a major earthquake. The global economy could feel it within weeks. Some analysts call Taiwan's chips a silicon shield. The theory is simple: because the world depends on Taiwan's semiconductor industry, major powers have an incentive to keep the island stable. But shields can also become targets, and that irony sits quietly at the center of Taiwan's economic success. The industry that made the island rich also made it strategically critical. To date, Taiwan's economy is highly advanced. GDP per capita rivals many Western countries. The island produces sophisticated electronics, servers, and components used across global tech. But its prosperity still revolves around an industry most people never see: semiconductors, tiny rectangles of silicon etched with billions of transistors. Invisible engines of the modern world. And strangely enough, Taiwan didn't win by inventing the most famous gadgets. It won by becoming the best place on Earth to manufacture them, relentlessly, precisely, quietly. Yet the system that built Taiwan's wealth now faces a new test. Governments in the United States, Europe, and China are trying to build their own semiconductor factories, billions in subsidies, massive industrial policies. Everyone suddenly wants domestic chip production, which raises an awkward possibility. If the world successfully spreads semiconductor manufacturing across many countries, Taiwan's greatest economic advantage could slowly shrink. For now, its lead remains enormous. The expertise, supply chains, and engineering culture built over 40 years cannot be copied overnight. But history has a habit of moving faster than expected. After all, Taiwan itself was once just a small island growing rice and sugar, which leaves one final question. Was Taiwan's rise a permanent transformation, or just a brilliant moment in the constantly shifting geography of global technology? Thank you for watching. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. See you next time.